right. Hello, everyone. This is James from the International Kriegsspiel Society, and this is a school of the Umpire, specifically to learn my personally developed system for handling American Civil War battles. We're going to spend about the next half hour going over the system and also how to umpire in general. This system, I made it. I remember about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, watching some of Marshall's videos, and I think he had done his own umpire video showing the SoCal system, which I haven't seen anyone do the SoCal system in a long time, but they use D6 dice. Most people prefer larger dice. And it seemed pretty simple, and I liked it. And so I took it and tweaked it a little bit. And what I like about my system is it's very simple. There's not a lot of calculations, not a lot of things to track, so it allows for quick combat. And in its simplicity, it allows you to do a lot of things. It doesn't bog you down, and it's still able to let you simulate the major things you'd want to consider when doing Civil War battles. So we're going to cover that today. We have Nakoki here with us. Hi, Nakoki. Feel free to if you have any questions at any point, feel free to pipe in. And we have Decimus as well. Welcome. Hello, hello. All right, so I'm sharing actually the end state of the Champion Hill battle, which we fought did as a live session just this past Thursday. And so I thought it'd be fun. We can use that as an example of the rules, and then we actually maybe simulate a turn or two just to show how the system works. And I know some of the players from the fight wanted to see another turn or two happen just to see what would happen. So we'll simulate that just to see who had the upper hand in the end, the Confederates or the Union. So as rules go, for my system, I typically do 15-minute turns. It can be modified for 30 and even hour-long turns, but I found it works best for 15-minute turns, and that's 15 minutes for me personally works really well. For movement, sometimes maps will have grids, sometimes they don't, and they have to use the measuring sticks. My general rule of thumb for movement is a piece moves 2 miles per hour or half a mile per turn. And so if you've got a basic infantry piece moving down the road in column, they're going to move half a mile, which for this map, I've got this measuring stick here, which measures half a mile. So on a single turn, just going down the road, that's as far as it's going to go. That's the base level of movement. Commanders can order their units to march double time or at quick step, and so basically doubling that speed. But when they do that, they basically gain a disruption per turn if they're going to do that. Cavalry moves twice that speed, so 1 mile in the 15-minute turn. And if you've got couriers or the commanders themselves, they go usually, and I'm not too strict on this, but usually about 3 sticks worth, about 1.5 miles in a turn. But there's a lot of things that can slow you down from that point. So if they go from column formation to line formation, even if they're on partially on the road, that's going to half their speed. So they're just going to move a 1/4 mile in a turn. If they're going into difficult terrain, let's say they're in line formation and now they're moving through a bunch of trees, that's going to half their speed again. So on this measuring stick, it's divided into 4, so they're going to go something like that distance if they're trying to move through woods in a turn. Also, if they're crossing a creek, and this isn't a huge creek right here, it's pretty small, but if they're doing that, even though they're not in trees, it's also difficult terrain, so they're just going to move something like that in a turn. Um, if they've received an order that is a change in formation, a change in direction, anything different from what they were doing before, I usually have their speed as well to reflect order delays. Generally, I'm assuming their commander is going to be somewhere relatively nearby, but there's obviously, that's a quarter mile just for this officer's sub-commander, whoever he's sending courier to this commander, telling him, hey, I want you, instead of go west, turn and go north. Um, well, if he was sitting right there and he did it immediately on that turn, he'd do something like that and then could maybe move that distance. But there's a time delay for that order to reach him, and so to implement that time delay, usually just half the speed. So there's going to be some time for those orders to get from the commander to him, and then for him to implement his orders across the line, and then for them to do some wheeling turn and go north. So they're going to go, something like that. And that pretty much covers it for movement, except for artillery. Artillery is a little bit tricky. So if it's normal foot artillery, generally if it's horse artillery, I just say it can keep up with the horses or the cavalry. And if it's foot artillery, you can generally keep up with the infantry. But when artillery goes into woods, of course they don't like woods at all. It's not easy, and so I usually give more movement penalty, even more than I would infantry if they're trying to move through woods at all. So it's really, if they're going off-road in the woods, they might move like that much distance, just because of how difficult it is. And then artillery's got a limber and unlimber, so I usually say that takes about half a turn on a 15-minute turn to get in position, limber and unlimber. So if they're moving down the road, and the commander gives orders, get down the road and then unlimber on that road, they could basically, in a normal turn, they could move something like that. But if they're unlimbering, they'd be able to go about half distance and then still be able to unlimber. And so by the end of the turn, they're unlimbered, and basically would start firing on the next turn. So those are the general rules of thumbs for movement. Not too complicated, not too hard to keep track of. Now, are there any questions from you guys on movement? Oh, sorry, Decimus. Let me share my screen. All right, I'm sharing my screen now. Sorry about that. Do you have any rules or questions on movement, Nikoki? All right. All right, we'll go into fighting then. So at a basic level, we'll just take 2 units of Confederate infantry brigade and a Union infantry brigade. If 2 units were fighting with each other, let's see, we got this going on. We got some artillery in the background shooting down as well. We'll do some basic combat here, and then we'll show what Champion Hill would do. So every unit that is attacking gets a d6 dice. And there's different ways to do it. You can show the attacking dice by the piece. I actually like to do the reverse, so I put the dice, whatever unit is getting attacked, I put the dice for being attacked next to it, just to reflect, like in this case, you've got infantry shooting at each other, but then the Confederates have some artillery firing an explosive shell overhead. And so they've got 2 dice attacking them, basically. So every unit that's attacking gets 2. Now, cavalry in Civil War combat is usually smaller. They're not, brigades, they're regiments. And so if cavalry was involved, it's basically half that. And so if there's 2 cavalry, I just usually treat them as 1 dice. If there's 1, then it's not as many people, so I usually have the results. We'll just throw cavalry in here for fun, just to show. So we got some cavalry here on the side shooting on their flank. So that's another dice. Poor infantry unit. So to resolve combat, basically just roll the dice, and there's 3 disruption states. So if a dice gets a 1 or 2, basically there's no disruption. If it's a 3 or a 4, it's 1 disruption, and a 5 or a 6 is 2 disruption levels. It's that simple. And then there's modifiers to that. So let's give these guys a little bit of a defensive advantage. So what are the modifiers? Things that reduce the die roll result, usually by 1, but can be 2 on the umpire's discretion. So if the troops are high quality, they're elite, they're old guard, they're grenadiers, whatever reason they're high quality, that's just going to reduce the result, reflecting the fact that they're going to be able to stand and fight much longer than a normal unit. If they're on high ground, and this is up to umpire discretion on all of these, but if they're on high ground, it reduces 1. If they're behind wooded cover, if they're behind defenses, like trenches or breastworks or whatever, within buildings, or if they're long distance, so between 50 and 100% of the max range. And typically, for infantry, my general rule of thumb is their max range is 400 yards. That's extreme max. So like 2 pips on here would be extreme. So if they're fighting and they're way, back here, that's going to reduce a die type already. Same for artillery. They can shoot a mile, which is 2 sticks. But if they're shooting someone, way out here at the edge of their range, I'm going to reduce a result just to reflect how hard it is to shoot someone versus someone who's like within a half mile or closer. Alright, so let's just get to the results. So these guys rolled a 6, so they actually did very well. And I made disruption trackers, which I like, and color coded using the DEFCON system. So 1 disruption is blue, shows a 1. 2 is green, 3 is yellow, 4 is orange, and then those are basic levels that units will still fight all the way through that. At 5, they're broken, red and broken, so they're running away. But doesn't mean they're fully routed. They can recover and come back to the fight. If given the circumstances, they get routed, it's black, and basically they're out of that fight that day. There's nothing that can be done that's going to get them back. And then finally, if they get captured, white, flag of surrender. So that's my unit and how I track the token for disruption. So infantry here in the woods, focusing on this Confederate infantry here, they rolled a 6. Oh, that changed. So they rolled a 6, so that's 2 disruptions on these guys. It's as simple as that. Now on these guys, they're getting 3 attacks. So they've got cavalry on the flanks. So we'll just roll that again just to see what happens. So they rolled a 3, but they're also cavalry, so that subtracts 2, which gets to 1. But they're also on the flank, which generally adds 1, maybe 2, and in this circumstance, I'd say they probably get at least 1 disruption from being shot on the flank. Nobody likes that. Now then, they've got the artillery and the infantry also shooting them. Now I rolled a 2 and a 3. So 2 is nothing. And then a 3 normally would be 1 disruption, but they're in the woods, so they've got, they're hiding behind trees, they've got cover, and with this low die roll, a 3 becomes a 2, and so it's actually no disruption. So this unit here is, despite having three other units firing at it, is actually doing quite well, only suffering 1 disruption in the turn. And that happens sometimes. The dice, they do things you don't expect, but as long as it makes sense story-wise, maybe these are more elite units, maybe they're just got really good cover, um, then that's fine. And if for some reason the results just really aren't making sense, you can always change it. If it went multiple turns where a unit's sitting here in the woods like this and they're just not getting disruptions, I would probably say, well, that doesn't make sense to me. They're going to get at least some disruptions, reflecting the fact that they're getting shot from all sides and outnumbered. So that is combat in a nutshell. I need to talk about things that increase attacks. So I mentioned flanking. So if a unit was getting attacked in the side, that's a plus or 1 or 2 to that attack. Oops, I didn't mean to delete that. If they were, let me get them again. If they were attacked in the rear, if that managed to happen, I'd usually give like a plus 2 to that attack, because that should be quite devastating. And same for artillery. If they manage to be attacking in the side with enfilade fire, I'd usually give a plus 1 for that attack as well. Now commanders have, they're being played by players. If a player specified that he wanted to lead from the front, I give a plus 1 boost to the attack of that unit, a little morale boost for that. So this guy says he wants to lead from the front. His men are inspired, so whatever the attacking dice is, a 5, that turns into a 6, so 2 disruption. But whenever they lead from the front, there's always the risk of getting shot themselves. Or even if they're not leading from the front, but if they're just in the line of fire, I'll roll to see if they're shot. And for my rules, just roll a d6, and if it's a 5 or a 6, they are shot, and then I roll again, and if it's a 5 or a 6 again, they're killed. If it's a 3 or a 4, they are, it's a medium wound, and a 1 or a 2, it's a light wound. Light wound, usually there's no penalty. They're just told that they're wounded. Give them a little scare. A 3 or a 4, usually it's something that will take them out of the game for a couple turns. Not something mortal, but could be. It's on the edge, so maybe they're knocked out, maybe they're incapacitated, maybe a doctor has to see them. Whatever it is, some medium wound basically eliminates them to where they've got to get recovered. Someone has to see them. They need a little bit of first aid, and again, 5 or 6, they're dead. Other things that can increase attacks. So if infantry's pushing up on artillery's there. Let's say they want to do a bayonet charge. At extreme close range, so within 200 yards, the artillery is going to switch to canister shot, which is very devastating. And so to reflect that, I basically let the artillery do 2 attacks. So I should do the same colored dice to not confuse people. So this infantry is coming in on them. They're doing canister shot, and I rolled 2 2s, so there's actually no disruptions. And this is one of those cases where I would say there's absolutely no way they're getting 0 disruption charging into canister shot, so I might give them 1 anyway, despite the die result. With Kriegsspiel Society, the rules are guidelines, and in the end you want to do what seems reasonable. And so if things happen and the dice just don't they get very lucky with the dice. Sometimes you can fudge it, and that's okay, as long as the result is reasonable and can be explained. We try and do that. Um, yeah, so that's canister shot. If if you're attacking very low quality troops, like say they're militia, um, then you also get a plus in your attacking dice just to reflect that they're likely to break a lot quicker than normal. Um, Once a unit breaks, so let's say these guys are running into the canister shot and they break before they arrive. They don't like it. They run away. They go to safety, and wherever it takes to get to a safe point, usually where the wagons are or well behind the lines or some clearing. So that in my rules, they don't recover disruptions until they've stopped running and have slowed down, and the officers have a chance to uh, to gather them again. So they might sit by their wagons, and then once they're slowed down and stopped, every turn they can recover one disruption level. So if they're just sitting there for a turn with their commanders helping them, they'll go from broken to 4, and then the next turn from 4 to 3. And usually I'll let them go if they're really sitting there and back in reserve and not being used again. If they're not being marched around or anything, they can go back to 1 disruption level for that battle. But they'll always keep that disruption just to reflect that they've been in the fight already. They don't go all the way back to fresh. Now, a commander, as action within their turn, they can specifically focus on a unit and help them to recover. So rather than recovering 1 disruption per turn, they'd recover 2. So it gives commanders options to, if that's what they want to focus on, getting their units back into the fight, they can do that. But when they do that, they don't, they're not doing anything else. They get a much smaller screenshot of the fight. Um, they're not leading from the front or anything else, so there's some penalties just in lost opportunity. But sometimes it's important to help recover. Um, any questions up to this point? It does not. Nope. So they go all the way through, 4 and then broken, and that doesn't affect the die. But it is a very good question because once they go to broken, I add a wound marker to them. Um, and some of the pieces have states, and I actually prefer the states, but these generic Civil War pieces don't. Um, I like it. A lot of Carter's pieces that he made have 3 states, and when you one is usually about this wide. The second and third state are just smaller. They're less wide, just to really visually show that the unit has lost a lot of casualties. But in these pieces only have 1 state, so you can't do that. So once they break, I add a wound marker to them, and that reflects just the casualties they've experienced up to that point. And so if they ever get back into the fight, let's say they break, they recover, they get rallied by their commander, and they come back into the fight at 2 disruption. Now every attack they do is a -1 because of that wound. So if they rolled a 6, that 6 just becomes a 5 because of that. And if they break again, or whatever happens, if they have multiple wounds, you're going to subtract that from the die result. So if they have 3 wounds, so a whole lot of lost men, that 6 becomes a 3 on just by that alone. That's a very good question. Any other questions? Yeah. So counter battery fire happens a lot, but the rules for handling it are just the same. So if 2 batteries are in the distance shooting at each other, they each get a die 6, and you apply those results. So in this case, they rolled a 1 on this guy's attack, so no disruption, and a 5 here. So they take 2 disruption. And when artillery runs are as broken, it's up to umpire discretion. Sometimes the guns are abandoned by the artillerymen and just left in the field. Sometimes they run with the guns, so it's up to you if when they're running, if the guns go with them or not. But yeah, that's how artillery fire works. So same idea as any other attacking unit. They just have a lot greater range. And in Civil War, they have the ability to fire overhead, so they can have. Generally, I say if they have a unit in front of them like that, they're still arcing and shooting with explosive shot overhead. That's okay. But if there's a unit like this close, I'd say they're too close. Someone needs to get away for them to be able to fire, and that's just a judgment call. What else? Correct. So, yeah, there are. I mean, obviously, there's losses throughout as they're gaining disruption, but to keep it simple, basically, it's considered minimal until they are broken. Anything else? All right. Well, in that case, I think I'm going to reload the game. Are there any before? So I'm going to resolve Champion Hill just as an example, and then that's how we'll end it. But are there any other questions in general for umpiring that you have? Maybe not specific to my rules, just in general about how it works. I don't generally, and that's one of the things that I don't bog down. Normally, in my battles, the fight's about 2 to 3 hours long is what we can cover, and so to make it easy, I just say that it's not a concern. I don't track it in any way. Um, However, if it is a fact, if you want as an umpire for it to be a factor, it can be. And I've done that before where even though I didn't have a rule for tracking it, if a unit's been fighting for, say 2 hours nonstop, or even maybe even an hour, I may say, hey, you guys are, they're disrupted and they're starting to get low on ammo. You need to get back to the wagons just to reload. Um, but usually, I don't bother just to have one less thing to track because everything you're tracking is just slows down the game. And the objective for me is for it to be quick and fast. I try to do 15-minute turns, and if there's a reasonable umpire to player ratio of like three players to umpire, I try to do about 10-minute cycles. So every 10 minutes in real time, we're handling a 15-minute turn. Um, and so in order to be able to do that, you've got to be quick in resolving it. Um, okay. Any other questions? All right. So we're gonna resolve it maybe just one turn, given the time of one turn of Champion Hill, just to see what would have happened if we got another turn. So we ended it at 10:15. So we're going to go to 10:30 now. We have the Union column. It's coming down Ratliff Road. They just ran into an ambush set by Stevenson, but his units they've been fighting a rough fight all morning long, starting at the crossroads, and they just barely he was able to rally and recover them and set up this ambush here. But as you can see, his units are they all got a wound. They've all at 4 disruptions, are at the point of breaking already. Um, but the Confederates have a lot of captured Union artillery. They have their own artillery. Um, the the Union cavalry's coming here down this side road, trying to cut off their path of retreat. So I don't have orders to handle, so I'm just going to make them up. But basically, I'd imagine, let's see, Union's got someone breaking, but they're going to want to deploy, extend their line out. Let's see, we got some creeks over here blocking this, so for movement, you can see, if you remember, so this guy, he's going to go off-road, which is going to be half speed, and he's also going to go through these woods. So if it's just off-road, it would be like that, but with the woods, it's something more in there. So this is about as far as he's going to go in this turn, trying to get to the flank. And this guy, I don't know, what would they want to do with him? Maybe send him off to the right flank, but they got those lakes in the way. And then they're going to be bringing up their artillery. They're coming down the road. So in a turn, basically, coming down the road, that's as far as they're going to go. They're not going to unlimber anything. And then the Confederates, they're going to sit there. This guy was moving up in reserve. That artillery's on the road and probably going to start helping to fire. But maybe not into the backs of the commanders. This artillery was going to fire over that way. And this, we got some horse artillery. So if they're unlimbering, put them over here, they can spend like half a turn. As I mentioned, it takes about half a turn to unlimber, so they'll spend a half a turn firing. So there'll be a little bit of penalties to that attack. These guys are coming up here, and the Union cavalry's just trying to hold. Alright, so we're going to resolve. I think the pieces are all set. These guys, I don't know what they're going to do. Probably just come up here and see what's going on. So, we'll say these guys are they're shooting a little bit as well. Alright, we're going to resolve this turn and see what happens. So, we'll start with these cannons. They're going to see infantry coming to threaten them. So they're, without orders of where to shoot at, they're going to shoot at what's threatening them. So we got 2 attacking them. They already had 2 disruptions. So 6 and a 1, that's no disruption, and that's 2. So they went from 2 to 4. Now they're shooting at them. That's at extreme range. So they rolled a 1, and then I'd subtract a 1, so basically nothing happened there. Now these 2 infantry are firing across from each other in the woods at an extreme distance, so I would subtract 2 from that result. So 1, nothing there, and then a 6, and then if you subtract 2, that's 1 disruption. So they go from 4 to broken. Oh, sorry. They also have a wound, so that would be an additional -1 to the roll. So it was a 1, but let's say it was a 4. It'd be 3 for the distance, 2 for the woods, and 1 for the wound. So it went from a 4 to a 1. So they're lacking firepower. Trees are blocking a lot. And they rolled a 4, which is enough to get disruption. Or I forgot what they rolled, but it's a 4 now. So they break. So they get another wound, and now they're running to the rear. This artillery, let's say they're doing counter battery fire on them. Not quite close enough for canister. It is close, but not quite. So 1, 2, so no, nothing happened. And then they're shooting them. 4, so that's 1 disruption. And sometimes I split it. If there's kind of 2 units that can take it, I split it, but unless it's specified that they're targeting a specific unit. These guys already got 2 disruption. They haven't had any yet, and so I'm choosing to give this one the disruption, because it doesn't make sense that 1 battery's sitting there and they break while 1 is completely untouched. Although I guess it could happen, but I generally try to keep it even along the line. Alright, and then these 2 are shooting at each other. They're all in the woods at extreme range, so it's not going to be much decisive combat. So 1, nothing happening here. 6, as I said, woods, so that's 5. Distance is 4, and their wound penalties or casualties is 3. So it went from 2 disruption to 1 disruption, so they're going from 2 to 3. And then finally, I don't want to select all of it, I just want the dice. This unit over here, 1 and 2, so nothing happened on either of them. Oh, I forgot to mention chain routes. So I have rules for to help simulate chain routes. So if we had this unit break, but everyone around him wasn't at super high disruption. But let's say this unit had broken and ran. My rules are if these guys are out on the wing, they're flanks in the air, and if they see the guys on their right breaking, they're already at 4 disruption. That they're not going to like being in that position, and so they would break as well according to my rules. Even though they're at a 4 and didn't receive an additional disruption, they're going to break and run. They're not going to stick around for that fight. Now let's say they were at a 3 and they had someone on their left, and that person was breaking as well. So basically, units on both sides of them are breaking. Even though they're at a 3 disruption, which isn't enough to be broken just on its own, they're going to turn and run as well. And that helps to simulate chain routes. So if you're able to get enough of the line breaking, everyone that remains, they're not going to stick around. They're going to run back and reform. They're not going to like that. So those are the rules for chain routes. Let's resolve down here. This is a little bit interesting combat. So we have 3 regiments of cavalry versus 3 brigades of infantry, plus some horse artillery with some enfilade fire. And I guess they're sitting in the back. So we'll roll combat for these 2. So that's a 2. It looks like they're in the woods, so that's going to subtract 1. And subtract 1 for them because they're in the woods. Now this is cavalry and they're just less men, so I'm going to subtract another 1 for that. So somehow this cavalry, they didn't get disrupted, they're still holding, and they managed to inflict a disruption on that infantry unit. So that's that. Here in the middle, we'll roll again. So these 2 units. So nothing against this guy, but he's got 1 wound already. He was fighting, he just barely got recovered. So that 4 becomes a 3, and then you could argue that these guys are in a clearing, so maybe that 3 stays, so they go from a 3 to a 4. And then finally over here, you got these ones shooting at each other. 2, so no disruption, and it's actually -1 for the wound. And then they rolled a 3. They're kind of in the clearing, so they get a disruption. And then this enfilade fire here, it's actually could be close enough for canister. So we'll say this is a devastating canister shot with enfilade fire. So 2 dice and then +1. Are they in the woods? They're kind of at the edge, so we'll just leave that. So that's 2 disruption, that's 1 disruption, so 3 total. So these guys definitely are breaking. They get a wound marker, and they're out of there. As I said with the rules of the chain route, if the person next to you is breaking and you're at a 4, well, now they're going. And these guys see their buds going and they don't like it, so they're going to go as well. So as expected, I mean, they've got superior firepower here. They got artillery involved. They're not going to stick around and see what happens. So cavalry's going to retreat to the north. All right, so that's 1 turn to combat. Oh, I didn't even do. There's sometimes a lot to keep track of. So I didn't even handle. I forgot this artillery here, shooting overhead. We'll say they're doing counter battery fire, so that's a disruption there. And then this artillery here, of course, they're already running, so it might not matter, but we've got 3 batteries all firing into this position. So even they already broke and are running, but that would have just made it more so. I mean, that's one, two, three, four disruptions to give. And with artillery fire, especially at distance, it's kind of judgment call which unit gets it. I usually try to spread it around the area because I don't think it's going to be accurate, but the explosive shells overhead are scary. So that was four disruptions just from these batteries. So they already broke, but that would basically, they're going to get another disruption level. They're breaking and running as it is. All right. Um, I'm not going to do any more turns. Any other questions from those who are here? Very good question. So, in Civil War, cavalry charges are very rare. Um, but I don't necessarily have anything in the rules reflecting that. Um, it's more of an umpire call. So let's say there's an infantry unit, and a player says, "I want to do a cavalry charge." Um, it did happen. It was rare, and it usually didn't happen. One, for the terrain. A lot of Civil War battles were fought in the trees, which is not favorable for cavalry. It wasn't like the Napoleonic battles in big, flat, sweeping fields. But let's say they are on a big, fat, sleeping field, and these cavalry happen to be armed with lances or sabers, which did happen. Then yeah, they could do a charge. In which case, you'd have. Oh, thank you. That brought up a rule I forgot to mention. You'd have a melee battle. So if you had, whether it was cavalry or infantry, um, if let's say the players order a bayonet charge where the units make combat, rather than rolling one set of dice each, they get to roll two just to help reflect that it should be more decisive and resolved quicker. So we got two fresh units bayoneting each other. Neither side gets an advantage generally, but I'm going to roll two sets of dice. So on the red guy, or on the Confederates, that's three disruptions, and on the Union, that's two disruptions in a turn. And so let's do another turn of combat. That's four disruptions, so they're broken, and that's three disruptions, so they go to broken. So in this case, both sides disengage, run away, at about the same time, which happened a lot. Sometimes there'd be bayonet charges and they didn't even make combat or make connection. But the rules would be the same. If there happened to be a cavalry charge, if the umpires were okay with the cavalry, closing the distance and hitting them, you just roll. It's the same idea for the melee combat. You just roll two dice to reflect that. And now if it's alone, right now I've got two because it's the easiest to reflect parity. If it happened to be one cav unit, I would subtract one from the roll result on the attack. Now, and in general, the reason cavalry charges didn't happen in the Civil War is because rifle fire was accurate. It had good range, and so if you're charging headlong into an infantry unit that's prepared, you're just going to get mowed down, and so they wouldn't do it. They, more like if they had ordered the charge, they probably turned around and went away, or depending on the unit type, they'd stay on top of their horses or even dismount and just shoot at a distance rather than charge directly into them. It's not Napoleonics worth dashing saber charges or lancer charges like you see in Napoleonic warfare. That was a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. I'd forgotten that aspect. What other questions do you have? None? All right. Well, I think that covers it. Took a little bit longer than half an hour, it's 45 minutes. But hopefully this was helpful as an overview. As I said, it's the simplest rule system I've seen within the Kriegsspiel Society. Um, which some people prefer more complications, more things to track, which can be good. But you always, whatever your system you use, it's all, in my opinion, simplicity is better, because it lets you resolve combat quicker. You're going to be able to get through battles a lot quicker and cover more combat within a time period, which means more fun. So thanks everyone for thanks Decimus and uh, Hydroxide Lithium and Nakoki for being here in person today, and for everyone who's watching later on. Hope you enjoy it and have fun playing.